Okay, so welcome everyone to our next session on Jewish literacy. And this week we are going to talk about the Mishnah and the Talmud. As I say often, this is another one of these things that I say so often, I sometimes think people are going to start throwing things at me, screaming that we've heard it too many times already. But Judaism is more appropriately described as the religion of the Talmud than the religion of the Hebrew Bible, or what Christians would call the Old Testament. Both Christianity and Judaism derive as their origins from the Hebrew Bible, and then Christianity develops as a religion based on the Hebrew Bible as read and understood through the interpretive lens of the New Testament and the Church Fathers. And importantly for us, Judaism is a religion and tradition which reads the Hebrew Bible as interpreted through the lens of the Talmud and the rabbis. And typically when I say the rabbis, I'm not talking about me and my buddies. I'm talking about the rabbis of the Talmudic era. So that's important to keep in mind. So in overview, that's another way of describing it. I'm sure I'm quoting one of my teachers. If the Bible is the heart of Judaism, the Talmud is its bloodstream. The only mathematical equation that you need to know for Talmud is Talmud equals Mishnah plus Gemara. And I'll be explaining in great detail what I mean by that. There are two Talmuds, the Yerushalmi, which is sometimes called the Jerusalem Talmud, sometimes called the Palestinian Talmud, edited and compiled in the Holy Land, not really in Jerusalem, but certainly in the Holy Land, and compiled around the year 400 of the Common Era. And the Bavli, sometimes called Talmud Bavel, compiled in Babylon around 500 CE. Let's see, chat. I don't always see chat, so if you have something urgent on chat, let me know. Oh, it looks like it's old. Okay. The Bavli is the primary Talmud. So if you hear someone mention a reference to the Talmud, they are talking about the Babylonian Talmud rather than the Yerushalmi. As a note here, the Bavli is 6 times the size of the Yerushalmi. And the reason the Bavli is the more significant Talmud is the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, is compiled during a time and edited during a time when the Jews are being harassed initially by the Romans. And then in the 4th century of the Common Era, Rome adopts Christianity as a state religion. And then both the Romans and the Christians are harassing the rabbis. And so the Talmud is more hurriedly put together under some stress and strain. While in Babylon, the Jews have been living there for 1,000 years since the destruction of the first temple. And they are very welcome there, and we have the capability of governing ourselves. So the Bavli, Babylonian Talmud, is put together much more carefully and slowly and edited much more carefully. The completed Talmud includes citations from more than 1,000 rabbis and teachers. The rabbis whose views are recorded in the Mishnah are called Tanaim, which is Aramaic for teachers. And the rabbis who are quoted in the Gemara are called Amoraim, Aramaic for explainers or interpreters. Let's see. So this is a slide you've seen before. We begin with the Bible, which in the Jewish order of books has Torah first, 5 books of Torah, then a number of historical books, which are called prophets, and then writings, which include things like Psalms and Proverbs and the book of Esther and the book of Job and so on, compiled in the year 90 of the Common Era. So here is our sacred story, our sacred myth, and we're sticking to it. The myth is that when Moses was on Mount Sinai, Moses was given two revelations. One revelation was the written Torah. So first 5 books, often called the 5 books of Moses, with the instruction, Moses, here's the written Torah, write it down. And the book of Exodus talks about Moses writing it all down. The second revelation is called the oral Torah, sometimes called Torah Sheba'al Peh, literally the Torah of the mouth. That would be how we would describe the Mishnah. So the story is that Moses was told was given the oral Torah, which, as you'll see in a moment, is quite voluminous, and told to never, ever write it down, to keep it oral. And the way this developed, according to the records that we have, is you would have rabbinic schools, and there would be geniuses at memory, and they would chant sections of Mishnah. So you'd have a group of people who were geniuses in memory, and each person would be assigned to a different section of Mishnah. And let's say we were going to talk about Pesachim and the Seder. They would ask one guy, sorry, no women, to stand up and recite a Mishnah about the Seder. And so here's a traditional Mishnah chant. Ma nishna halayla hazeh mikol halaylot shebakol halaylot anolochim chametz umatzah halayla hazeh kulo matzah. Anybody recognize what I'm talking about? Sorry?
Matzah.
Matzah, the 4 questions.
4 questions.
Okay, right. So that's from the Mishnah. I probably asked this question when we had the second class on Torah, but can you think of any, the obvious disadvantage with having a pure oral law is it can change the game of telephone. You pass it from one generation to another and things change. Can any of you think of an advantage of keeping sacred text purely oral and not writing it down?
You always have it with you.
You always have it with you, assuming you have all these memory guys, because as you will see, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but here is a book, the Mishnah. This is the Mishnah in English translation, about 800 pages. So you're unlikely to memorize this, although there are people that can do amazing feats of memory. Can you, anybody, Travis, you have your hand up.
Maybe that you could change with the times without it being as much of a controversy. If things start getting written down, then you don't want to change or adapt.
Yeah, so I would say I would agree with you that presumably you don't change the text, but you have to discuss the text.
Right, maybe that, yeah.
Yeah, if you don't discuss it, you're going to lose it. And in discussing it, you have to say, okay, so here is this text. Well, how does that relate to us now? Rather than just, purely being abstract in your discussion. Angela.
I would say that it would be more difficult for your enemies to destroy your texts as well. They couldn't burn it. They couldn't take it.
Yes.
It's a part of the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But they could just kill the people that have it memorized.
Yeah, so if it's widespread enough, then yes. And as we'll see, that's the reason they ultimately write it down. Murray.
Oh, I was going to say, perhaps it's the same reason, that you can misinterpret things like in an email, because they invented those smiley things and whatever, but you might get a different, meaning out of it. If it's spoken as opposed to written.
That's a very interesting thought, and I agree with you. If something is written down, as we see this all the time when we study biblical text or Torah, we have all kinds of different interpretations. And at least if it's oral, you're going to discuss it. Anna, I see you have your physical hand raised.
I don't know how to do not physical hand raising too.
Yeah, if you look down at, well, anyway, let's not worry about it. Hopefully we'll see you. If I don't see you, say something. But go ahead.
say that it's less open to translation, like multiple layers of translation, and like Murray said, like interpretation.
Who is speaking?
Anna was speaking. You were a little, I think, probably far away from your microphone. I had trouble hearing you.
I said that I thought it would be less likely to be subject to the multiple layers of translation once it's written than it has the tendency to be translated from language to language, layer by layer, and then ultimately interpreted, like Murray said.
Okay. Thank you. So,
I have a question.
yeah, go ahead, Bryce.
Does the Mishnah contain anything that would be anachronistic? In other words, is there anything out of place in time in this that would be later? In other words, I'm just wondering if
So
in the transmission, if things got added or changed.
Well, the Mishnah sort of reads mostly like dry law. Like it will state, here are the 4 questions. And there's actually, in a sense, a lot of the Mishnah is concerned with how to do animal sacrifice, assuming the temple is rebuilt, or how it was done before the temple was destroyed. So I would say it's not anachronistic, but it's obsolete. But
well, if it was transmitted by, I guess Moses. Oh, never mind.
yeah, it's an oral transmission. Jen and Claire.
Yeah, I
Clara.
had a comment about that, and I think Clara had a question. When the sacred text that you have is only oral, then your experience of it is not with your eyes. It's completely with your tongue and with your body. It's an embodied text, and it's a different relationship to it. It's a different experience of it, or with your ears if you're hearing it, than if it's written. So I could see that also just playing a very different role in how you experience the sacred.
Yeah, it's a different kind of learning, visual learning versus oral learning and experience. And also these texts were chanted, so there was a musical element to them.
It might be another reason, since we assume everybody was literate back then, which is not the case like it is today, or at least in this country. It would have only really been like the priests would have been in charge of it, and the people, it's like they would be detached from it in a way that is better, when it's said among the congregation.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
everybody can speak, but not everybody can read.
Yeah, just to sort of clarify, first, the priests are almost irrelevant at this point in time. The temple has been destroyed, so now we have a new.
I know, but you said it was given to Moses, and the priests existed then. So.
Yes, but it's very interesting. If you look at the first verse in the Pirke Avot, which talks about the chain of transmission of the oral Torah, they skip the priests. And I think what's really going on is the rabbis are writing this story, and they basically have decided that the priests are not relevant anymore. So just as a matter of fact, as this teaching gains popularity, the temple's been destroyed. The priests have nothing to do. So this is really all about the rabbis.
But the priests were only one of the tribes, right?
The priests were the male descendants of Aaron, and they were Levites.
Yes. So.
But once the temple is destroyed, they have almost no official role in Judaism. Before the temple is destroyed, they're in charge because they are supervising the temple service and all of the animal sacrifice. Bryce, and then we really need to move on.
So wouldn't the fact that the priests are eliminated from this, wouldn't that be anachronism, considering that it was given to them during the time of the priests? And
so I would say, yeah, I'm kind of mixing two ideas. The one interesting thing, there's a lot in the Mishnah that is written about how you offer sacrifice and the role of the priest, assuming that the priesthood and the sacrificial system is restored. But in the chain of command, it said God gave the oral Torah to Moses. Moses gave it to Joshua. Joshua gave it to the men of the assembly, um, and they gave it to the Sanhedrin and so on. They conspicuously skipped the priesthood.
Hmm.
Okay, I'm going to move on because there is a lot to cover. So I'm not going to go through this, but I want to point out there's a lot more sacred literature going on other than just the Talmud. So this is all, oh, you know what? I should go back. I didn't really finish this. So what happens now in the year 200 of the Common Era, the Jews have had two unsuccessful revolts against Rome, and these schools of memory geniuses are being harassed by the Romans, and the Jews are kicked out of Jerusalem. And so the leading rabbi of the time, who is Yehuda HaNasi, who is so important that his title in all this literature is simply rabbi. If there's rabbi and no name after it, they're talking about this guy, Yehuda HaNasi, literally Rabbi Judah the Prince. He decides that he has got to write down the Mishnah. So he takes what he considers to be the most significant parts of the oral law, and the estimate is that it's about 1/6 of the total of the oral law, and writes it down. And then for the next few hundred years, the rabbis separately in the Holy Land and in Babel, in Babylon, discuss the Mishnah, and their carefully edited and compiled discussion is then called the Gemara, and the Mishnah plus the Gemara equals the Talmud. And we don't stop there. So there's commentaries, and you'll see in a page of Talmud, I'm going to show you a page of Talmud in a little bit, you will see commentaries in the margins and all kinds of discussion. This has to do, so there's comments by Rashi, then we have Jewish legal codes. There's another commentary on Torah from a mystical perspective called the Zohar, which is the foundational text of Kabbalah or Jewish mysticism. There is Midrash, which are more rabbinic stories, more of a folkloric, mostly folkloric, but there's also legal Midrash. And then all the way down at the bottom, we come up with prayer books beginning in about the 6th century, because the Talmud is going to introduce the concept of group prayer. Nowhere in the Bible do we have a single instance of people getting together to pray. We have some individual prayer, but we don't have group prayer. What the rabbis do, a tremendous innovation, either in response to texts given to Moses on Sinai, or in response to what the heck do we do without a temple, decide that instead of continuing animal sacrifice, since the temple is destroyed, we are going to substitute group prayer 3 times a day for the 3 times a day animal sacrifice. And we are going to substitute doing mitzvot, following commandments. The word mitzvah means commandment, and study of sacred text for the sacrificial system in the Bible. So in a way, Murray, your comment is an interesting one. In biblical times, when the way you related to God was through animal sacrifice, the average person didn't need to be literate. But in replacing animal sacrifice with group prayer and study of sacred text, there enters into the Talmud the requirement, certainly, that all men need to be literate. And if they're not literate, they can't fulfill the commandment of studying sacred text. So in the Talmud, it actually says that you build, if you have a town, it's a higher priority to build a school in the town than a synagogue. And in fact, one of the words that we commonly use for synagogue, namely shul, really means school. Okay, Mishnah. Mishnah is from the Hebrew word shana, which means to repeat, therefore to study by repetition. We think of shana as a year, but a year is something that repeats cyclically. The recorded oral law, let's see, the recorded oral law, since needed, oral law is needed since the Torah didn't answer all legal and religious questions. For example, in the Torah, it says you will do no work. The Hebrew word is malacha, which is a special category of work on the Sabbath. And in the Bible, violating that law is punishable by death, but there's no detail about what's work and what's not work. So we'll see later what the Mishnah and the Talmud have to say about that, but it's pretty important to be specific. Since we have an issue of capital punishment, it's pretty important to be specific about what is malacha, what work is prohibited on the Sabbath and what work is not prohibited on Sabbath. Another reason for oral law is to maintain relationships with teachers, which was deemed to be the best way to pass down Jewish tradition, teachers studying with their students. And as I mentioned before, it was compiled by Yehuda HaNasi after the failed revolts against Rome, fearing that the laws would be lost if they were not written down. The statements of oral law, this is pretty technical. You don't need to know this. It will not be on the final exam. The statements of oral law that Judah did not select. If Judah selected it, it's called a Mishnah. If he didn't select it, it's called Tosefta or Baraita. If you study Talmud, particularly with us on Saturday mornings, you will see that phrase, particularly Baraita, used a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, was there a question? Rachel.
Yeah, so is there still some living oral law?
I would say in Jewish tradition, the Talmud would be called the oral law, even though it's written down.
Uh-huh.
The stories your bubby tells are oral law, oral
But,
traditions.
The chapters contain several Mishnayot, which are the, oh, maybe I'm confused.
Welcome to the club.
I thought he wrote down, whatever he wrote down from the oral law is now the Mishnah.
Yes.
But how do we know what was left out? Did he say?
Okay. Yeah, I'll tell you. A very good question. Because in the Gemara, when they're discussing the Mishnah, someone will chime in and say, wait a minute, the Mishnah says this, we were taught in a Baraita, and then they will quote another element of oral law. And when you're actually studying Talmud, you can always tell when they slip into a Baraita because it's in Hebrew. As you will see, if I remember to mention it, and if I don't hear, I'm mentioning it right now, most of the Gemara is Aramaic, not Hebrew. Aramaic is a language that is related to Hebrew in a similar way where, let's say, Spanish and Italian are related. But it's a separate language, and the Gemara, by and large, is written in Aramaic. But when you know, for those of us who struggled our way through it, Aramaic's another language. We got to learn it. And every now and again, you know, we'd be studying Talmud, and it said we were taught, and they would jump into Hebrew, and it would be a big relief because most of us studied Hebrew a lot more than we studied Aramaic. So it's Mishnah is written in Hebrew, but the Hebrew. Sorry, was there a question?
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. The Hebrew is slightly different from that of the Bible. Remember, this language is evolving over thousands of years. So the Hebrew of the Bible, which also evolves, and in some ways, you know, we have questions that arise as to what's the age of a particular poem or bit of text. And the real scholars of Hebrew can tell sometimes by the choice of words, by the way a word is spelled, or by grammatical construction, how old the Hebrew is. When we get to Mishnaic Hebrew, it's very simplified and pretty clear cut compared to biblical Hebrew. And I'll just mention that the Hebrew that is today spoken, that was revived in Israel, was based on biblical Hebrew. So the Mishnayot, which is just plural for the word Mishnah, are short, elegant, and idealistic compared to the Gemara, which in a way, yeah, so in the sense, the Mishnah corresponds to the Constitution, elegant and general in structure, whereas the Gemara often corresponds to Supreme Court cases, which ultimately decide what the Constitution means. And what's going on there is quite similar to what we see, you know, in the Supreme Court. There'll be a Mishnah and, you know, a little block of Mishnah and pages and pages and pages of Talmud trying to figure out what the Mishnah means. And the story in the Talmud would ramble on, and they'll go off on digressions. And it's sometimes you actually need to diagram the logic, because the logic can get so complicated and involved. Broadly speaking, the Mishnah is divided into 6 orders, and each order is divided into tractates. There is 63 tractates in all. Each tractate has several chapters. The chapters contain several Mishnayot, plural for Mishnah. So what we would call a verse in the Bible, we would call a Mishnah in the Mishnah. And so a typical reference might be to Sanhedrin 3:4, referring to the 4th Mishnah of the 3rd chapter of the tractate Sanhedrin. And although the tractate Sanhedrin is in the 4th order called Nezikim, that's typically not given in a typical citation. Everybody got that? That is on the final, by the way. So in a moment, I'm going to show you just a picture of some Mishnah, of a collection of Mishnah, and then we'll read a little bit. So this would be a Mishnah with commentary. And I mentioned, this book, Danby, this is really a classic translation of the Mishnah. And it's about 800 pages in English. And I just want to point out, just to give you a sense of the volume of the Mishnah relative to the volume of the Talmud. So again, the focus is always mystery to me. This is a section here, the Mishnah on Megillah, which is on the scroll of Esther, and it's 8 pages long. Those 8 pages would themselves be the subject of an entire volume of Talmud, which would look something like this. So the Talmud is far greater than the Mishnah. The Mishnah itself is the size of the Bible. Sometimes I will refer to the Mishnah as sort of our New Testament, in the same sense that the New Testament for Christians defines Christianity. This text, really, along with the Talmud, defines Judaism, but it's far more voluminous. So the Mishnah itself is 800 pages translated into English, which is roughly equivalent to the size of the Bible. So here are just some examples, literally cut and pasted. Remember the old days when cutting and pasting meant cutting and pasting? Well, that's how I got this. From the Pirke Avot. The Pirke Avot is actually an unusual Mishnah because it has broad sort of principle statement rather than detailed laws. And this is actually what I was referring to earlier. Moses received the law, lots of footnotes here, but they're talking about the oral law from Sinai, and committed it to Joshua, and Joshua to the elders, and the elders to the prophets, and the prophets to the men of the great synagogue. They said 3 things: be deliberate in judgment, raise up many disciples, and make a fence around the Torah. So you see, they left out the priests here. And this concept of making a fence around the law or a fence around the Torah is something that if you've studied Judaism, or as you study Judaism, you will become aware of, that we add safety factors, I guess you would call it in engineering, to keep you from accidentally or inadvertently violating a commandment. The clearest and craziest example, maybe it's not the craziest, you probably think of crazy ones, it's pretty crazy, is the laws on meat and milk. So in the Torah, 3 times it says, don't cook a baby goat in its own mother's milk. In the Talmud, and it's generally understood as making a fence around the Torah, they say don't mix any meat with any milk, including chicken parmesan, chicken and cheese, and you can't cook a baby chicken in its mother's milk. If you have any questions, we can ask the medically trained people in
A chicken has no milk.
Exactly, that's the point. Chicken breasts aren't. But again, as we study this, we would also say, or we might interpret, I would interpret the rabbi saying, if you're eating meat, you had to kill a living animal. So meat is inherently involving slaying or killing an animal. Milk is the essence of life. And one of the principles in Judaism is we keep separate things separate. So perhaps one of the principles here is to keep things relating to life, like milk, separate from things relating to death, like meat. Travis?
Is it the same with fish?
No.
Okay.
Fish falls into a category called parv, which means it is, I was going to say neither fish nor fowl, but that would be the poorest possible example I could use. It is neither meat nor dairy. So you can have lox with cream cheese or lox with chicken. Robin?
I always thought there was another issue, and that was that the plates that people ate on were earthenware. They weren't sealed like ours are today. So that if you put meat on a plate first, then the meat fat went into the earthenware. And then if you had dairy on top of that, it would sour the dairy.
Yes. Well, I don't know about souring. But
it would turn it. It would, because you can you can have dairy, you can have like ice cream after a meat meal if you wait a certain amount of time.
No. So let me be precise.
Go ahead.
The rabbis were concerned about the same thing. So not only a bigger fence, let's expand the fence. Not only are you going to keep all meat separate from all dairy, so you're not going to have a cheeseburger or chicken parmesan, but you're going to have separate dishes for meat and dairy and separate silverware for meat and dairy. In modern times, glassware is thought to be impervious. So you don't need separate glasses for meat and dairy. And I have no idea whether there is a chemical souring issue. The rule generally is, as I understand it, and I'm not worried about these laws myself, that you can eat meat after dairy. No. Yes. If you eat dairy first, if you eat
and then have meat.
You have what soup?
You can have cream soup.
Yes.
And
so
then meat.
Yes. So you can have meat after dairy, but the reverse is not true.
Correct.
And certain traditions will require you to wait 4 hours after meat before you have dairy. Other traditions will require you to wait 6 hours. Bryce?
Is this an calling it the law, is this an artifact of the translation into the Greek?
No, I don't think so, because this is I don't know that the Mishnah went through a Greek translation. It's just what this translator chose to translate the word Torah.
And the other thing was not to seethe a kid in its mother's milk was more of respect out of the mother, not to cook her baby in her milk.
There's no explanation in the Torah. And the only explanation I've ever come across are some scholars that suggest that it may have been a Canaanite magical idol worship rite, and that it was included simply not to use Canaanite magic.
Thank you.
Okay, so just some other Mishnah. So we have these other rabbis who received the Torah from them, the law, the oral law. And one said, provide yourself with a teacher and get yourself a friend, the way it's commonly translated. And when thou judge any person, incline the balance in his favor. So these are general principles. Hillel and Shammai. The most famous statement of Hillel is down here at the bottom. Hillel would say, if I am not for myself, who is for me? And being only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? So in the Pirke Avot, in this particular section of Mishnah, it's fun to study. It's actually traditional to study on Sabbath afternoons in the summer. There's a lot of kind of really good, you should pardon the expression, meaty text, which encourage discussion. So now here's something completely different, as Monty Python would say. This Mishnah, which is in Ketubot, can anybody guess what Ketubot might be connected with?
Weddings.
Weddings, exactly. Ketubot is the plural of ketubah, and a ketubah is a marriage contract. So this section of Mishnah is going to be concerned with the question of what is a man's sexual obligation toward his wife. And interestingly, the reverse is not stated, but it is also stated, I don't think right here, that this is his obligation, if she doesn't want to have sex, she has the right to say no. But here's the minimum. So this is Mishnah with commentary. The Mishnah is actually quite more compact. So the Mishnah continues its discussion of a husband's obligation to cohabit with his wife. Married rabbinic students may leave their homes and go to another town for the study of Torah without their wives' permission for periods up to 30 days, even though they will be unable to fulfill their conjugal obligations. But workers may leave to work in another town without their wife's permission for only a week at a time. The Mishnah now explains the husband's conjugal obligation, which stems from the biblical verse, and her duty of marriage, he shall not diminish. So very common in the Mishnah, they are going to pick a verse in the Bible and say the verse in the Bible is somewhat obscure. We in the Mishnah, and even more so in the Gemara, are going to explain exactly what the obligations are. Remember, this is getting back to what I consider to be the obsessive compulsive nature of Judaism. If in the Bible it says you should thank God for blessings, great. If I eat a piece of bread and I'm thankful, is it okay to say, rub-a-dub-dub, thanks for the grub? No. The rabbis do what they call minting blessings. They say, here is what you have to say. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lecha min haaretz, which is, blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of everything, the one who brings forth bread from the earth. If you say that, you've fulfilled your obligation to thank and bless God. If you don't say it, you haven't. So a husband has certain obligations to his wife. How do we know if we fulfill them? The Mishnah is going to answer. Jay, did you have a question? Yeah.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I'm a little disturbed. A man can go to another town and study Torah from 30 days.
Yes.
However, if he's going to go to another town, he can only go for a week.
Without his wife's permission.
We're basically talking about sexual relations.
And interpersonal relations. I wouldn't say it's only sexual relations.
Well, it says here, husband's obligation to cohabit with his wife. Now, you see cohabit as one thing, I see it as another. Explain to me how they could come up with something like that.
Let me finish reading what the rules are, and then I will explain the origin.
Okay.
And her duty of marriage he shall not diminish. Varies according to the husband's occupation and how frequently he's found at home. Men of leisure who spend most of their time at home are obligated to cohabit with their wives every day. Workers who work in their hometown are obligated to cohabit with their wives twice a week. Ass drivers who leave their hometowns and transport merchandise to surrounding villages, but who are not ordinarily absent from their homes for more than a week at a time, are obligated to have sexual relations with their wives once a week. Camel drivers who transport merchandise greater distances are required to cohabit with their wives once in 30 days. Sailors who are away from home for extended periods of time are required to have sexual relations with their wives once in 6 months. These are the husband's marital duties according to the viewpoint of Rabbi Eliezer. And I can't remember if I have. Yeah, so this gets translated into Jewish law, into halacha, as referenced by the Shulchan Aruch, which is the most authoritative Jewish law. The conjugal obligation stated in the Torah. A husband's conjugal obligation varies in accordance with his physical abilities and occupation, unless otherwise stipulated by the parties. So if the parties can agree to something different, a man of leisure every day of the week, the conjugal obligation of a worker twice a week, ass driver once a week, camel driver once every 30 days, and a sailor once every 6 months. I want to see if I have more commentary. No, I don't have it. So to answer your question, Jay, in one section of Torah, they talk about flocks, and I can't remember where this is, and they talk about how many animals of different animals, how many males and how many females there are. And depending on how hard the animals had to work, if the animals were just grazing, you have fewer, the female to male ratio is higher. One male can take care of a lot of female animals. If this work was more strenuous, the number of males to females is more balanced. So that's in the discussion in the Talmud, that's actually how they come up and justify this. There's a story in the Talmud of a rabbi who would leave to go study, presumably with his wife's permission, for a year at a time, and only come home to his beloved and loving wife once a year. When did he come home? He came home on Yom Kippur, which is the one day of the year when you're not allowed to have sexual relations. And the story goes that he was so wrapped up in his studies that when he looked up to leave to go home for his one night, it was already too late and he wouldn't get there in time. Meanwhile, back at his home, the wife is standing on the porch and waiting and waiting and waiting. And when she realizes he's not coming home, she sheds a tear. And Jen and Clara, we were discussing the power of tears today. And as she sheds this tear, the study hall collapses and kills this guy. Okay. So I learned this with a great Texan Talmud teacher named Judith Abrams.
Yes, I studied it with you.
Yes. So you may recall I started writing a song as we were studying this, and I will close with, sounds like a country western song, right?
Right.
Well, I wrote one. So at the end of the session, I will write you the song inspired by this. I will sing you the song inspired by this little bit of Talmud. Okay, just more Mishnah. Let's see how we're doing on time. About the Day of Atonement. We studied this in a group when we were studying the Day of Atonement. Let's talk about the fasting. So you're supposed to fast, but again, how much food constitutes a violation? If a man ate a large date's bulk, the like of it together with its stone, so the volume of a date, or if he drank a mouthful, he is culpable. So what's the limit that you can eat or drink without violating the rule of fasting? For eating the volume of a date and for drinking a mouthful. Any foods may be included to make up the date's bulk, and any liquids may be included together to make up the mouthful. What a man eats and what he drinks may not be included together. So you get a date's volume and a mouthful of liquid. If he both ate and drank in a single act of forgetfulness, he forgot it's Yom Kippur, he's liable for one sin offering only. Sin offering refers to temple sacrifice. So even though this is written long after the temple's been destroyed, they're still assuming it's going to be rebuilt. They do not cause children to fast on the Day of Atonement, but they should exercise them therein 1 year or 2 years before they are of age, that they may become versed in the commandments. And if a pregnant woman smelled food and craved after it, they may give her food until she recovers herself. He that is sick may be given food at the word of skilled persons, and if no skilled persons are there, he may be given food at his own wish until he says enough. So here the principle, which is fleshed out more in the Talmud, is if you should not fast for medical reasons, then your fasting actually violates Jewish law. And if you think it's okay for you to fast, but the doctors say you shouldn't fast, you are not allowed to fast. And if the doctors say it's okay for you to fast, but you feel like you shouldn't fast, you can eat. So again, broadly speaking, in Jewish law, anything relating to health and safety are permitted. And this is an important one. You know, there are stories I've heard of chaplains in Jewish hospitals of patients ripping out their IVs as Yom Kippur is beginning because they don't want any artificial sustenance or nutrition entering their body. I'm not going to dwell on this. This is actually interesting because some of you have heard the phrase pikuach nefesh, which means to, you think it means to save a life, but it really means to search for a life. If a building fell down on a man and there is doubt whether he is there or not, or whether he is alive or not, or whether he is a Gentile or an Israelite, they may clear the ruin from above him. And that's pikuach nefesh, they may search for him. If they find him alive, they may clear it away still more, but if dead, they leave him. And they actually got on the subject, even though we're in Mishnah Yoma, they started talking about what happens on the Sabbath. So this is actually the origin of that. And one thing also important for Yom Kippur, if a man says, I will sin and repent, I will sin and repent, he is given no chance to repent. So if you are saying, well, I'm going to sin, and on Yom Kippur, I'm going to fast, and then my slate will be cleared with the idea that I'm just going to pick up the sinning right after Yom Kippur, the repentance is not effective. If I will sin and the Day of Atonement will affect atonement, then the Day of Atonement affects no atonement. This is the important one. For transgressions that are between man and God, the Day of Atonement affects atonement. But for transgressions that are between man and his fellow, the Day of Atonement affects atonement only if he has appeased his fellow. This is a huge difference between Judaism and Christianity. And the underlying idea is that for sins against God, which might be blasphemy, which might be ritual violations like eating pork or not praying 3 times a day, and so on, we believe that with sincere repentance, the Day of Atonement is effective at atoning. But for a sin against another person, we are taught, this Mishnah is teaching, that the Day of Atonement is ineffective, which is to say God cannot forgive sins of one person against another until and unless the person sinned against forgives. And I don't think it's here, but in other places it gets more detailed and says, you know, you have to ask sincerely 3 times. If after the 3rd time, and also you're obligated to, as much as possible, restore the consequence of your offense. So if you broke the guy's camera, you should have the camera repaired or replaced. And then if you've atoned sincerely 3 times and the person rejects your atonement, your request for forgiveness, then you've discharged your duty and the person is guilty of the sin of being unforgiving. So just as one more thought on that, I often add, by definition, murder becomes an unforgivable offense because the person that you've offended, the person you've murdered, cannot forgive you. But then Judaism has a concept of you have certain numbers of sins, certain numbers of good deeds, and God is both just and merciful, and ultimately weighs the balance of your life in some sort of afterlife judgment. Details to follow once you're dead. So don't ask me. My answer will be God knows.
Another question, please.
Yes.
I can understand the meat and milk routine.
Mhm.
And I can understand, I can't understand why we can't eat pork.
On one level, God knows.
No, is it written?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Twice in the Torah, Leviticus and Deuteronomy. The rules for meat being kosher is the animal has to have split hooves, kind of like a cow has 2 big toes, and the animal has to chew its cud. So a pig has split hooves but does not chew its cud. And the pig is also called out specifically as not being kosher. And then the question is, why isn't the pig kosher? So there's a school of thought which say the kosher laws are health related. That, you know, in back in days when we didn't know about cooking thoroughly, pig that wasn't cooked thoroughly might carry trichinosis and there'd be other health consequences. That idea is adopted by some rabbis and rejected by others because it reduces the Torah to a health textbook, and also raises the question, if we know how to cook pork healthfully, does that make it kosher? And poison mushrooms are kosher. And my one word response to the thesis that kosher is health related is schmaltz. Those of you who know what schmaltz is the Yiddish word for chicken fat. And some of us, and I think griveness, you have to fry it, right? Which clearly makes it healthier by frying it. Yeah, fried chicken fat, the ultimate health food. Delicious and kosher, but not exactly healthy.
Also,
hold on, Beth, did you have something?
Yeah, I've also heard the theory that pigs weren't kosher because they were not herd animals. And at the time those laws were being written, we needed to have herd animals. But I think those things like the herd and the trichinosis are kind of like, let's look back and find out some reason.
Yeah, so there's a lot of that we have a law and there's no explanation in the Torah. So the rabbis are looking for some underlying principle. Jade, you had another question?
Yeah, I just adding to it. No longer conservative, I'm now reformed. And reform, I have a different feeling as far as Judaism and the laws. And I'm not trying to sell a pulled pork sandwich, but what I'm trying to say is, in today's day and age as a reformed Jew, I can see nothing wrong with eating a pulled pork sandwich.
I accept your statement. And what I would say is, my understanding of reform theology is ethical laws, how we treat one another, animals, and the environment are binding. Ethical Jewish law are binding on all Jews. So, for example, the law about how often you're available to your wife, you should consider binding because that's an ethical law. I'll let your wife know about that later. Ritual laws, such as kashrut and others, I would say the highest tradition of reform is examine those laws, even experiment with that as a form of spiritual discipline, and see if that law, that practice is spiritually meaningful to you. And I'll give you an example. Kissing a mezuzah, kissing the Torah, praying in the morning. Many people, many Reform Jews, find those laws spiritually meaningful. Lighting Hanukkah candles, eating matzah on Passover. Those are all ritual laws, and many of us find those laws spiritually meaningful. Other scholars suggest that these laws were ways of keeping Jews together. If you can't eat at a non-Jew's home, you're much less likely to marry them. And you have to stay together. The laws about kosher slaughtering. So in the Bible, there's nothing written about how you kill the animal. In the Talmud, there's a lot written that it has to be killed with one stroke, that you have to sever the spinal cord, ultimately to be as painless as possible to the animal. And it has to be done by a specialist. In English, we would say a butcher. In Hebrew, we would say a shochet. What that meant practically is, let's say you have a goat and now you want lamb for dinner. Mom didn't go out in the backyard or ask an older child to go out in the backyard and slaughter the goat. A bloody mess, I would point out.
Well, you won't get any lamb that way.
But you take the animal, whatever animal, you take the animal to a butcher. So the average Jew didn't come in contact with a lot of blood. And so this, scholars would say, makes a higher revulsion of Jews classically against violence and bloodshed. I would say now that's maybe less likely. Well, now nobody's slaughtering animals. I mean, I remember taking kids in Jerusalem or in Morocco to the meat market, and there's animals hanging and the blood is draining. And, you know, if you want chicken in Morocco, I've seen this. I didn't see it in Israel. Yeah, because in Israel it would be at a butcher. But in Morocco, if you want chicken, you go up, you pick a live chicken, and they take it and whack the chicken's head off, and dunk it in boiling water to get the feathers off. Some of Sonia's kids who were with us at this time didn't eat meat for months. Murray.
There was a time when I was trying to be healthy, but also ethical in the sense that the systematization of these animals, and I am purposely kind of pointing towards the Holocaust, where you see pictures of innocent Jewish people penned up for death.
Mm-hmm.
And in today's animal industry, where you have chickens and other animals and force feeding and
Mm-hmm.
and inhumane practices, it was always my opinion that if people had to slaughter their own food, they'd all be vegans.
Yeah, you may be right. And in Judaism, you don't slaughter your own food. You can't. So what I would say is, in Judaism is definitely speciest. Namely, humans are considered a much higher form of species than other animals. Only humans are said to be created in the divine image. Having said that, we are obligated to treat animals with care and with concern. In Jewish law, you're obligated to feed your animals before you eat yourself. And there's all kinds of rules about that.
Well, in the story of Joseph's brothers, they go out and he sees them.
They kill an animal.
No, it sounds like they don't kill it. It sounds like they just chop off one of its legs and start eating it, like something from The Walking Dead or something. But
no. Read the story carefully. It says they slaughter
they
it.
Definitely say you're not allowed to. You have to actually kill something before you can eat it. And the way they were making it out was that they just chopped off whatever without taking care to actually kill the animal.
Read the story carefully. I don't think it's in there. But I would say, being a vegetarian, the easiest way to be kosher is to be a vegetarian. If you're a vegetarian, you are kosher. We need to move to the Talmud.
Okay.
The Talmud is astoundingly difficult, both in language and in order to follow the logic of what is going on. And if you don't believe it, join a Talmud study group. We have at a Temple of Dad Elohim Talmud study Saturday mornings at 8:00. It's difficult because the rabbis wanted us to study with a teacher and a friend, and the rabbis wanted to teach their successors, I would say other rabbis, the logic behind Jewish law and tradition so we could continue the process. They could have easily written a simple code which would have been quickly out of date. The rabbis were smart enough to write a code of law, but instead they write the Talmud. And in the Talmud, they take us through long and tortured arguments about how they are coming up with legal decisions, sometimes to say, well, here's a question. Should we do this or should we do this? Well, let's look at this. And they'll go on for pages and pages looking at this, and then they'll say, nah, we're not going to do that. Let's come back to this. And then they'll bifurcate 2 or 3 more times and come up with what you should do. So the question is, why did you take us through all that agony? Why didn't you just tell us to do this? And the answer is, and it's very important, they were teaching us how they think, because they knew that any laws that they would write would be quickly obsolete. So instead, they take us through these arguments so that the rabbis of later days, in making legal decisions, will make the same decision that these rabbis would have 1,500 years ago had they had the benefit of being posed that question. The Gemara is a commentary on the Mishnah. Gemara comes from the Aramaic word for completion. It's written in Hebrew and Aramaic, I would say mostly Aramaic. There is not a Gemara on each of the 63 tractates of the Mishnah, Babylonian Talmud 37, Jerusalem 39, and not the same ones. The Jerusalem Talmud is more focused on issues relating to the temple service and temple worship. And some of the Talmudic material may be lost over the years. This is actually a fascinating one. There's some material, there's some horrible critiques in the Talmud of Jesus and Christianity, and it has been lost because the rabbis quickly figured out if they left it in, and remember, every book before Gutenberg was hand copied. So in hand copying, copy this copy onto another piece of papyrus or vellum or scroll or whatever. The rabbi said, gee, if I write this about Jesus, I'm going to get killed. So stuff was lost. And there's actually some interesting work in recreating lost passages of Talmud, because in some cases, commentaries survived. Commentaries on the lost section survived. And by working backward from the commentary, people can figure out what the Talmud actually said. The Talmud contains both halachic, which is legal material, and agadic, ethical and folkloric material. The legal material is 80% of the Babylonian Talmud. So I'll give you an example of agadic material. I would say most Jews are familiar with the story of Abraham smashing the idols in his father's shop. How many of you have never heard that story? Raise your hands. Okay, yeah. Okay, so the Bible identifies that God chooses Abraham to be the first monotheist. So the question is, how did God decide on Abraham? And the rabbis decide that when Abraham was younger, since his father was an idol worshiper, he was in charge of his father's idols. In fact, they project that he may have been in charge of his father's idol store where he sold idols. And one day his father comes back from a business trip and all the idols are smashed except for the biggest one that has a stick in its hand. And Abraham's father, to be technical, I should say, Avram's father, asks him what happened. And Avram says, Dad, I came to bring an offering before the idols, and they all started fighting over who was going to be fed first. And the biggest one took the stick and smashed all the idols. And his father said, what do you take me for? I made these idols myself. They can't do a damn thing. And Avram says to his father, Father, listen to your own words, and God notices this is my guy. So that's kind of a folkloric story, good story, and there's a zillion of them. But it's not legal material. So that's considered agadic material.
Far cry from George Washington and the cherry tree.
Yeah, well, okay. The Talmud was first printed in Venice in 1520, one of the first books to be printed. Every Talmud printed since this date has the exact same layout. Every word on every page is exactly the same in its layout. And I'm going to show you an example of that. A citation by Talmud might be something like this, Shabbat 4a, which means the fourth page, the fourth leaf in the book, in the tractate Shabbat, and the A side, the front side rather than the B side of the page. I'm going to show you a sample page. And the Talmud reads like stream of consciousness. I mean, they'll be talking about a particular point of law, and they'll say, Rabbi Yossi says this, and Rabbi Gamliel says that, and relating to this bit of law. And then they'll go through 14 other stories where Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Gamliel had a dispute. And they may spend 5 or 6 pages talking about Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Gamliel's dispute and what happened. So the problem is, as a book of law, you have to know the entire Talmud and where everything is discussed in order to make use of it as a legal code, which is why around the year 1000 or so, the rabbis started organizing legal codes, where you had a rabbi like Maimonides who clearly knew the entire Talmud, and he collected all the laws about Shabbat, all the laws about, let's say, kashrut. He organized them logically. Yeah, and as I say, the discussion wanders. Okay, so I don't know if I can, nope, I can't. Hold on. So yeah, this is still too small to see. Basically, this is roughly speaking the organization, not roughly, this is the organization of a page of Talmud. So this is the beginning of a section. This much here is Gemara. Just this much. I'm sorry, this much is Mishnah, not Gemara.
Yeah, okay.
And then Gemara goes on, and it might go on for 4 or 5 pages. And then what you have, everything is very carefully organized. So the title of the chapter is here. The tractate is here. This is the B side of the page. The page number is somewhere else. I can't remember where. And then this whole section is the commentary of Rashi. And this whole section is the commentary of Rashi's students called Tosafot. Here's a commentary of this guy. Here's a commentary of this guy stuck in. Here's a commentary of somebody else a little bit later. It's after the original printing. And there are references in the margin. Some of them have to do with legal issues. Referring to a legal code. And if you buy a traditional Talmud, it will always look exactly like this. So I want to show you 2 examples, just for fun. Here is a page. This is a text that says Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, Masechet Kiddushin, the tractate on Kiddushin or holiness. And as I open, let's open the first page because that will look like. So here's the first page, and this is the opening. So in this case, the Mishnah goes to here, and then I don't know if you see a little gimel mem and a apostrophe there. That's the beginning of the Gemara. But then you have all this other commentary, right? But wait, there's more. So these are the main commentators who made it on the big pages, and the guys that didn't quite make the big book have commentary in the back. Okay, it's sort of focusing, but it gets pretty damn small. Okay, I was discussing this today. I believe, I have no reason, no justification or backup for this belief, but I believe Jews are preferentially nearsighted, because if you're really nearsighted, before I had my cataract surgery, I could read that. But here's a portable Talmud. You're traveling and you want to bring your Talmud with you, right? So here's the same pages, but smaller, because that stuff was way too big, right? Including the stuff in the back, which I don't know, might be 2-point type. I don't know. But back before I had my eyes fixed, I could actually read this. I was so nearsighted. My useful vision was from here to here. If you're super nearsighted, you can read really, really small print. And so I have this theory that that's helpful if you're a scholar, because you're dealing with tiny print all the time. Now, for those of us whose Aramaic skills are a little rusty, there is a wonderful resource called Sefaria.org, and it has Bible and Talmud and Mishnah and everything else you can think of, with a tremendous Rashi and the traditional commentators and Midrash, with a lot of it translated. So here, just to show you, this is Berachot. The pages always begin with 2a, and the text is vocalized, namely it's got vowels and it's got punctuation, and it's translated, and there's some commentary. So if you're into studying Talmud, and it's free, you know, they'll every now and again they'll ask you to send them some money, but Sefaria is free. This is a collection of Talmud. So these are books. They even look like this book, right? A little bit. That's slightly fancier in binding. So that is a set of Talmud, all from that one book of Mishnah. It's enormous. 60. Sorry.
I looked it up, and it's available on eBay for about $3,000.
Right. That's probably the one with commentary. Are you looking at the?
I don't know which one it was. I just was looking at yeah.
Yeah. So I want to give you a quick example. I think I used this example when I talked about Torah in our second class. Just briefly to remind you, the Sabbath The commandment about the Sabbath in Exodus says, remember the Sabbath, keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor. So you're actually commanded to work, but on the seventh day, you will not do any malacha, any work. Not you, not your son, your daughter, your manservant, maidservant, cattle, stranger. Nobody works. Clear? So now the question is, how do you define work? But more importantly, how does God define work? And so, and just not in the Bible, but sure enough, in the Mishnah, Shabbat 7th chapter, 2nd Mishnah, they list 39 things of the major categories of work. And then I really don't want to belabor it, but to give you a flavor for what's in the Gemara asks, why state the number? So notice the Mishnah opens by saying the primary labors are 40 less 1, namely 39. So the first question the Gemara is going to ask is, why do you tell us that? If we're really curious about the number, we can count. The underlying presumption is everything in Scripture has deep meaning. So therefore, by telling us the number, there must be a reason. And in this case, we're going to have a legal reason for telling us the number. And you also get a flavor for how terse the material is. So Rabbi Yochanan said to teach that if one performs them all in one state of unawareness, he is liable on account of each separately. What does that mean? If I wake up one morning and I've been sick and I've been a little bit out of it, and I go into the bathroom and I turn on a light and I look at myself in the mirror and I realize I really need a shave. So I take out my electric razor and I start shaving myself. And then I turn on the radio and I realize it's Shabbat. So the question is, have I committed one violation, forgetting that it was Shabbat, or 3 separate violations, turning on the lights, turning on the electric razor, and turning on the radio? And the answer is 3 separate ones, which is important if it were 2,000 years ago and we would have to bring sacrificial offerings to atone for sins. That is a little bit about the world of Talmud. I have a couple of books that I recommend by Rabbi Judith Abrams of blessed memory. And it's
a wonderful teacher.
She was a wonderful teacher. She wrote she wrote a book, she wrote Learning Talmud, the Talmud for Beginners, in 3 volumes, Prayer, Text, and Living in a Non-Jewish World. She wrote a book about the women of the Talmud. And she didn't write this, but there is even a complete idiot's guide to the Talmud. And I'm embarrassed to say that it's actually pretty good. There are collections of Talmudic sayings, Cohen, Every Man's Talmud, Shulchan Books, and Talmudic Anthology. So, so I want to read my favorite Talmudic story, which is the oven of Achnai. And next time, I don't remember what our next class is, probably Midrash, legal codes, and so on. Let's see, our next class. Yeah, Midrash, Halakha, Jewish legal codes and issues. So there's some material in my book and in the handbook. So I'm not going to read the story. This is the way it appears in the Talmud. I'm going to tell you the story. This is in the Talmud. It's called the oven of Achnai. The guy named Achnai had an oven. And the question is, it's a question of kashrut. And it's a detailed technical question. Certain things, if they're whole, let's say I have this is actually what it is. If I have a whole cup and something unkosher falls into the cup, because it's whole, it conducts the uncleanliness of that thing. If the cup is in 2 halves and something falls into it, because it's not a whole thing, it can't convey uncleanliness. Don't worry about that. This guy named Achnai had an oven, and it was a easy to assemble and easy to disassemble oven. Imagine a set of rings, each one slightly smaller than the other. So you put ring down 1, you put the ring down 2, put the ring down 3, and so on. And it forms what looks like a beehive as an oven. Everybody with me?
Yes.
So the rabbis are having an argument about what legal category this thing falls into. And surprise or surprise, they don't agree. So Rabbi Eliezer brought forth every imaginable argument. Rabbi Eliezer has a lot of distinction, and generally speaking, he carries the day. He brings forth every possible argument, but they didn't accept him. So they didn't accept the arguments. So in frustration, Rabbi Eliezer says, if the halacha, if the law agrees with me, let that carob tree walk. Let the carob tree prove it. Thereupon, the tree gets up and starts walking. Now, I don't know about you, but I would be convinced. Rabbis aren't convinced. No proof can be brought. It walks 100 cubits out of its place. Cubit is about 3 feet. No, cubit is a foot and a half, foot and a half, right? From the tip of your finger to your elbow. It's about a foot and a half. So this is 150 feet. Some people say it was 400 cubits. No proof can be brought from a carob tree, they retorted. He says, if the halacha agrees with me, let the stream of water prove it. Whereupon the stream of water starts flowing backward. No proof can be brought from a stream of water, they rejoin. Again, he urged, if the halacha agrees with me, let the walls of the schoolhouse prove it. Whereupon the walls incline to fall, they start collapsing. But Rabbi Joshua, who is the head of the group, rebuked the walls, saying, if scholars are engaged in a halachic dispute, what have you to interfere? So they didn't fall in honor of Rabbi Joshua, but they didn't resume upright in honor of Rabbi Eliezer. And no doubt there was a school with walls sort of half falling down. And so the claim is that was the school. Now he says, if the halacha agrees with me, let it be proved from heaven. Whereupon a heavenly voice cries out. God shows up to this argument. Why do you dispute with Eliezer, God says, seeing that in all matters the halacha agrees with him? But Rabbi Joshua arose and exclaimed, Lo b'shamayim he, which is a quote taken completely out of context. Even Dr. Fauci would agree that this quote is taken out of context. It's taken entirely out of context from the book of Deuteronomy, but Joshua says it's not in the heavens. If God shows up and says the law should be this, our response is, who asked you? Not only God, don't you get a vote? Don't you get to make the decision? But you don't even get a vote. Now, so I'm gonna leave this thing. So a few hundred years later, the Talmud goes on to say, somebody ran into Elijah. People are always running into Elijah in the Talmud. Why? Because Elijah is the one character in Jewish tradition that doesn't die. Elijah is ascended into heaven on a fiery chariot. So the tradition understands that Elijah may come back at any minute, traditionally thought to usher in the Messiah. That's why we sing at the Seder for Elijah's cup. We're hoping Elijah will show up and bring the Messiah with him. So they say in the Talmud here, a rabbi hundreds of years later run into Elijah. And the rabbi asked Elijah, when we said God basically to mind your own business, what was God's reaction? So I'm going to ask you what you think God's reaction was. How many of you think God was annoyed that the rabbis were not following God's intent? Raise your hands. I know a lot of you are going to be cowards about this. How many of you think God was really happy that the rabbis didn't follow God's express statement? Raise your hands. Okay, let's see.
You had the story up. We could read it.
Yeah. So I didn't know if you would read ahead. So Rabbi Nathan met Elijah and asked him, what did the Holy One, blessed be he, do in that hour? He laughed with joy. He replied, saying, my sons have defeated me. My sons have defeated me. So the point here is that in the Talmudic process, this is very important. It's a fun story, but it's a very important point. In the Talmudic process, the understanding is, God, you've had your shot. It is now up to the rabbis to write Jewish law. There is no more revelation. Almost every religious tradition has to close its holy books, because if you leave open the possibility that someone will come along, I am telling you right now, I'm going to work tonight on the book of Latka. Okay? Whereupon pepperoni will turn out to be kosher, and it's flunking that's treif. So the problem is, if you allow prophets after the close of Scripture, how do you keep control on your religion? So every religion, and the only exception to this is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Their head guy is a prophet, and I am told by knowledgeable people that it is a guy, he can actually change Scripture, and he can make rulings. So what it means is, a very real reading is, a while ago, quite a few years ago in Hebron, a Jewish fanatic took a machine gun out and murdered Muslims at prayer. And the answer is, he believed he was being guided by the Spirit of God and, inspired by Pinchas, and we can have a whole discussion about what was his inspiration. But the answer is, even if you believe God is telling you to go do something and violate Jewish law, you are not allowed to do it. It's inauthentic. Even if we all agree it's really God showing up and making the announcement, the prophecy, revelation is closed. And one of my teachers, Yitz Greenberg, talked about 3 phases of Jewish history. In phase number 1, which was biblical times, up until the Talmud, God was in charge of Judaism. With the Talmud, God is no longer in charge of Judaism. The rabbis are in charge of Judaism. And what Greenberg argues is that with the Holocaust has a significance equivalent to the Talmud, the destruction of the temple in the Talmud. With the Holocaust, Jews are in charge. The rabbis are no longer in charge. And what Jews decide they're going to do, ultimately Judaism is going to have to follow. It's a very profound insight. So before I get silly and read my country western version of this Talmudic passage, are there any questions? And maybe I'll read the passage. I'll sing the song, and then I'll cut off the recording, and you can ask questions. So, to understand this, the name of this song is Double Mitzvah Friday Night, and it's to the tune of Achy Breaky Heart, because remember I said I thought this sounded like a country western song. The reference to Double Mitzvah Friday Night is a Kabbalistic one. We are going to talk about Kabbalah, and the idea is that that partners making love on Friday night is a special mitzvah. It's always a mitzvah, but on Friday night, on the Sabbath, it is an extra special mitzvah. A couple of things that are worth explaining. You saw before, if you the frequency of a husband's obligation is once a week for an ass driver, once a month for a camel driver, twice every 6 months, twice a year for a sailor. There's a reference here about tefillin. Tefillin are the boxes you put on your arm. And for some interesting reason, I have no idea, the verb used for putting on tefillin is lehaniach tefillin, which means to lay tefillin. Some of you with that kind of mind may see where I'm going here. The word daven means to pray. Halacha is Jewish law, and Bavel is the Babylonian Talmud. Okay, so are you ready for this? If we were all together, I would ask you to clap, but it might not work so well on Zoom. Okay, you can study Torah, be happy, dance a hora, meditate and daven left and right, but come back once a week. Come back now, don't be meek, because it's a double mitzvah Friday night. Double mitzvah Friday night. By me, you're out of sight. Come home now, don't you know the halacha? Yeah, don't break the law, the Talmud Torah law, or I'll have to revoke your bar mitzvah. If you drove an ass, you might not have much class, but at least I'd have you once a week. And if you drove a camel, according to Talmud Babel, once in a new moon we'd hide and seek. But you're worse than a sailor, a twice-a-year failure. You never come home anymore. And though I'm always willing, you only late to fillin', and that's no mitzvah Friday night. Double mitzvah Friday night. By me, you're out of sight. Come home now, don't you know the halacha? Yeah, don't break the law, the Talmud Torah law, or I'll have to revoke your bar mitzvah. Thank you. I'm here all week. Tell your friends. And I guarantee you won't hear that material at Chabad. So any other questions before we close?
No, I was at a lecture today with Rabbi Rachel Adler.
Oh.
And she laced tefillin every morning, and her cat thinks that the leathers from her tefillin are something to play with. And she said they have all little teeth marks in them.
Yes, and she has just written a book
Yes, that's what she was
about,
talking about. Yeah.
I think, life or Judaism from the perspective of a cat.
Yes, the myth of cat.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
and she's an amazing teacher. I am proud. I can look up and at my smicha, my rabbinic ordination, and see exactly where she signed it. So I'm very proud of that. Yeah, and one of the things when I talked about putting on tefillin, the tefillin entangles tzitzit, the fringes from your talit. So if you're putting on tefillin, first you put on your talit and you're wrapping the tefillin, and it is, at least with me, it is invariable that the tzitzit get wrapped up and tangled in the straps of the tefillin. And it's just possible there's something deeply mystical about the tzitzit and the tefillin getting wrapped up in each other. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? For those of you who are down a conversion path, we are going to have a session tomorrow night. And I want to tell you, I am very excited. I'm putting together a PowerPoint to teach prayer. And as a result of some of the discussions that we had last week, and it's a lot of fun to put together, and I think it's going to be very useful. So the world premiere of that thing will be tomorrow. I'm far from finishing it, so I'll be curious to know what you think of it. And my thanks to those of you who suggested it. So with that, I will stop the recording.